Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices. Our hostess for today's program is Teresa Miller, Executive Director for the Oklahoma Center for Poets and Writers at OSU Tulsa.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My special guest today is Gerald Clarke, who's written two wonderful biographies, Capote and Get Happy, which is the life of Judy Garland. Thank you for being here, Gerald.
Thank you, Teresa. I'm delighted.
All the way from New York. I understand you turned down a spot on the Today Show to be with us here today.
Absolutely.
How did you get involved with Truman Capote in the first place?
I was writing a series of articles on writers back in the early 70s. I did Gore Vidal, I did P.G. Wodehouse, the great comic writer. I did Nabokov. I did Allen Ginsberg. It was quite a group. And I did Truman Capote. And after I did Truman's, a publisher called me and said, would you do a biography of Truman? And I thought for a minute, and I said, well, maybe. I called Truman, whom I knew slightly from having interviewed him, and I asked him if he would cooperate, and he said, after 30 seconds, well, Truman had a wonderful baby voice, much imitated. Well, yes. And I thought it would be a lark, to tell you the truth. I really underestimated what was involved. I thought it would be a series of wonderful lunches and dinners at fancy New York restaurants, which turned out to be true. Because Truman was lively. He was at that time the most famous writer in America. It was just after In Cold Blood, which had received enormous acclaim and enormous attention. You can't really imagine it now. And Truman, I was told, had the highest Q rating, that's a TV term, of anybody except the Queen of England.
You are kidding. Now, today, authors aren't held in that regard or don't have that much appeal. Maybe, well, I can't think of any writer that would. Can you?
I can't either. I'm sure that people know who Tom Clancy is and a few people like that.
But still,
Stephen King, but...
not that...
No, Truman was known by everybody. I'd walk along the streets of New York with him, and cab drivers and truck drivers, big burly guys, would say, "Hey, Truman, how are you, kid?" Things like that.
What was behind that?
People liked him. Truman had enormous charm to be with personally. I think it was more than charm. He could be captivating. He was really very seductive in terms of instant friendship. I've never known anyone who had the gift of instant friendship as Truman did. And I've talked to numerous people who said they knew him for 5 minutes and they thought they'd known him forever. And I think part of that was conveyed on TV, although Truman was extra nervous on TV.
Was he?
His voice went up an octave or two, and well, most people are nervous on TV. Live TV, Johnny Carson, that sort of thing.
He was a regular almost on
Yes, and he would tell wonderful stories, and he could be very funny. He was the one who was being interviewed. He was on a panel with Norman Mailer. Norman Mailer was spouting off and going on, and Mailer himself writes about this. And they were talking about Jack Kerouac, and Truman said, well, that's not writing, that's typewriting. And that's the only thing anybody remembered from that interview. All the things Norman Mailer had said, people forgot, but that's typewriting. People remembered that. He had a way of he had a gift for one-liners, which TV loves, and he was charming, and he was a wonderful, wonderful companion. To have lunch or dinner with, there was nobody better in the world. He was fun. He was mischievous. He was full of stories, but it wasn't just a monologue. He was interested in the person he was talking to, whoever it might be. It didn't have to be a famous person. He would really want you to talk to him, and that's always very inviting to have somebody who concentrates on you and is really interested in what you're saying. So Truman was great fun to be with. I thought it would be writing about him. I thought it would be a lark. I thought it would be kind of a champagne book. You'd open it up and the bubbles would come out. What I didn't know was that as I was beginning, this is the early 70s, like 73, 74, Truman was beginning another chapter of his life, and then it was the last chapter of his life, and that was his downfall. this man who had risen so far, so fast, from a little boy in Alabama, dirt poor almost, to hobnobbing with the richest and most famous people in the world, yachts and everything that go with it. It was suddenly people turned against him. He wrote a story called Le Côte Basque, 1965. Le Côte Basque was a famous restaurant in New York, still exists. And in that story, he talked about all of these famous friends, using pseudonyms for most of them. And some of the stories were rather unpleasant.
Oh, yeah.
And they didn't like it. He took me. He showed it to me before it was published. He took me swimming at Gloria Vanderbilt's swimming pool in Southampton. She was away for the summer, and beautiful pool. And he was floating on a raft in the middle of the pool, and I was lying on the side and reading this story, which was very long. Then he explained to me who everybody really was, and I said, "The obvious. You would have said it. Anybody would have said it. Truman, they're not going to like this very much." And he said, "Nah, they're too dumb. They won't know who they are." Well, the piece appeared, and it was as if New York had been hit by an earthquake.
Oh, clearly. Isn't that where he revealed the story about the Paleys?
Yes, the Paleys. He told a very nasty story about Bill Paley, who was the founder and chief owner of CBS, which was mostly true. It was a very unpleasant story. And he told other stories, too. One of his great friends was Slim Keith, and she was the narrator of this thing. She was a chief protagonist. And it was not really unpleasant about her, but she didn't like it. And she turned against him just like that. And so did the others. I went to a restaurant with him, well-known restaurant. We sat down. I went in first, sat down at a banquette. Truman always got the best tables. And there was a grand couple, a man and a woman, sitting at the banquette next to me. Everything was fine. Then Truman came in, and they both got up very ostentatiously and asked the head waiter to put them somewhere else. In other words, they didn't want to be seen in the same vicinity as Truman Capote. That was very hurtful to him. Now, he should have known this. Truman was not a stupid man.
Well, no, he's a brilliant man.
He was a brilliant man. My guess is that he, in some way, wanted to retaliate against them and for some of the slights they had given him. They treated him as they loved him in many ways, but they treated him as a court jester in lots of ways. And there were other motives as well. The Bill Paley story, for instance, he loved Bill Paley's wife, Babe Paley, who was a great beauty.
And she was devoted to him, wasn't she?
She was absolutely. They loved each other. They were devoted to each other. And he didn't say anything bad about her. It was about her husband. Her husband had mistreated her by having affairs with other women, including supposedly Marilyn Monroe. Here he had as his wife one of the most beautiful women in the world, and he had to go out chasing floozies. Not that Marilyn was a floozy, but anyway, that's what he did. And this drove her crazy, in a way. She wanted to divorce him. Truman convinced her not to divorce him, and Truman wrote a little bit about this, using another name, of course. And Babe Paley didn't really know who it was. She was sort of guessing, and she called, because she hadn't heard this terrible story. She called Slim Keith, who was furious, who told her. And what Truman hadn't realized, he was trying to retaliate against Bill Paley for Babe, for the terrible things he had done to Babe. And what he didn't realize was that Babe would stand up for her husband no matter what. That was in the code of the aristocracy from which she sprang, that you always stand beside your husband, even if he's a louse. And she did.
And even when she was dying, they didn't reconcile, did they?
No. Jack Dunphy, Truman's companion, called her up a couple of times, and he hadn't had any feud with her, and asked her to please talk to Truman. Truman couldn't bear the fact that she was dying, and he couldn't be there to comfort her. She was dying of lung cancer. And Babe said to Jack, well, I'll have to talk to Bill. And Jack knew then that it was all over, because of course Bill wouldn't let her talk to him, or certainly wouldn't recommend it. And that was the end of it. So she died without their ever reconciling, and it hurt Truman enormously. He was she was his best friend, and in many ways the love of his life. It was very hurtful.
Well, it's sort of interesting how his life started. He was such a beautiful young man. I'm not sure a lot of people realize what a beautiful young man he was on the covers of, wasn't Life magazine?
Life magazine did a spread on writers in the 1947, and at that time Life was TV, like TV.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody in the country read Life magazine. And it was about writers young novelists from the Second World War. And Gore Vidal was in there, the others were in there. Truman had not yet published a novel. He was the only one who had not yet published a novel. Yet, Life gave him a full page, and the others little snippets. I think it drove somebody like Vidal crazy.
Oh, I'm sure.
But Truman had a way of attracting the camera, of attracting publicity, of attracting everybody. On the dust jacket of his first novel, Other Voices, Other Rooms, the author's photograph on the back, on the dust jacket, caused almost as much attention as the book itself, because Truman was pictured himself. He was the one who did it all. He was lying on a chaise longue in a tattersall vest, tie, looking at the camera as if he wanted to go to bed with it, very seductively. Well, this caused something of a sensation, and people would walk along Fifth Avenue and look in the bookstores, and he loved one story about one woman who, two women standing there looking in Brentano's or Doubleday or someplace, looking at this dust jacket, saying, well, he looks dangerous. Truman loved that sort of thing. He overdid it in a bit because the photograph took away from the writing. In other words, he kind of he went over the top a bit too much. But he was a natural publicist, and that's a gift for a writer, particularly these days.
And not to mention the fact that he was a brilliant writer. I mean, some of his stories, his novels are just stunning.
I think Truman had a greater feel for the music of the language than just about anybody of that generation. I can't think of any other writer. I'm not saying he's the very best writer, but he's certainly up there. But in terms of style, I can't think of any better stylist than Truman.
Like a Christmas Memory, those wonderful closing lines, like a pair of kites. I mean, it really does give you chills as you read it, because it's just so extraordinarily beautiful.
He had a gift for the telling phrase. I'm editing a book of his letters, and even in his letters, they're all original. Most people's letters are just letters, but Truman's are all they have something in them. They have some original turn of phrase, some unusual way of speaking, and I don't think it was labored. I don't think he spent a lot of time doing it. Almost like Virginia Woolf's diaries. You read her diaries, and which she just turned off before dinner, 15 minutes before dinner, and you wonder, how did this woman think of all these wonderful phrases? Well, Truman did the same thing.
Oh, yeah. A great wordsmith. Poet, really, in many ways. Before we move on to talking about your second biography, I want to ask you about the very special relationship Truman had with the novelist Harper Lee.
They were very good friends. They had grown up together as children in Monroeville, Alabama, a little town north of Mobile. Truman was about a year older than she was, maybe a year and a half, but he was a tiny kid, very small. He never grew much beyond 5 feet, 5'4". And she was, even though she was younger, she was bigger, and she was a tomboy, and so she could, as one cousin said, beat the steam out of him. But they were great friends. And they played together all the time and had tree houses and that sort of thing. And she's a character in To Kill a Mockingbird. Or, I'm sorry, he's a character in To Kill a Mockingbird. He's the character Dill. And she describes him as a pocket Merlin, someone who could tell stories and enchant everybody. And she got it just right, and that's what he always did. They remained great friends. She came to New York in the late 40s, and they saw a lot of each other. And then when he went to Kansas in 1959 to research In Cold Blood after the murder of the Clutter family, she went along with him, and she was a great help because Truman landing in Garden City, Kansas, town of 10,000 people, was like a man from Mars. They had never seen anybody like that. Little tiny boys, oddly dressed. They didn't know what to make of him. But they did know what to make of Harper Lee because she was a good down-home girl. From Alabama, a little town in Alabama. She fitted right into a little town in Kansas. And so she paved the way with a lot of people. She was friendly, she was outgoing, and they would do research together. They would interview people together. They didn't take notes, either one of them. But they would interview somebody, then they would go back to their hotel rooms, separate rooms, and write down what the person had said. And then they would get together and compare their notes so that they would get it right. The theory was that a tape recorder or even a notebook intimidates people, particularly in those days when the tape recorders were not as usual as they are now.
Well, and particularly in a prison. I would think, too, that the atmosphere was there. This was prior to her writing To Kill a Mockingbird, wasn't it?
She'd written it, but it hadn't come out yet.
You know, the rumor persists that Truman Capote wrote To Kill a Mockingbird, or at least substantially. I hear stories about that all the time. What do you think? Is there any truth to that?
I don't believe so. I think it's quite possible that Truman, she showed it to Truman, and it's quite possible also that he made suggestions. I don't know. That's common with writers, that you show it to a friend and a friend makes a suggestion. But that's a far cry from saying...
Actually writing the book.
No, actually writing the book or even writing a large chunk of it.
And dismissive of her talent as well.
Yes, I think the reason people say that is because she's never written another book.
Yeah.
And the question is, why not?
My feeling is if I had written a book like that for someone else and it had gotten all that acclaim, and I'm sure he would feel this way many times over, how could you keep it a secret? As much as he liked to gossip, I think he would have let it out.
I think he would have too.
Let's talk about your other stunning biography, Get Happy, The Life of Judy Garland. What attracted you to Judy Garland? Because again, this is a major time commitment on your part.
Yes, I thought it would not be quite as long as it was, or take as long as it did. I was looking for a subject. I knew that it would take time, and when you're writing a biography, you really have to be interested in your subject. You have to have, you're living with the person for a long time, and you don't want to be with somebody you really can't stand or that's boring.
Oh, exactly.
And I thought about, lots of people, and someone mentioned Judy Garland, and I said, oh, no. Then I thought about it again, and I said, well, Judy's different from other Hollywood characters. She's not just a movie star. She's not just a singer. She's not just an entertainer. There's something special about her. She has a place in American consciousness that other stars, even big stars, Clarke Gable, for instance, or Gary Cooper, don't have. Judy remains with it, partly because of The Wizard of Oz. The Wizard of Oz is really part of our national myth. And it's mostly because of Judy. Of course, MGM had a lot to do with it too. But if it had not been for Judy, that movie would not be what it is now. I thought about it, and I thought, well, there is something special about her. I read the biographies that had been written about her, and there had been several, and she didn't come through to me. I didn't. I won't say that they were bad. One of them was actually pretty good. It had a lot of facts and pretty accurate. But they didn't. Judy didn't come through. The character. I said, this isn't the woman I see in the movies. The vibrant woman. You watch any Judy Garland movie, and you see her vibrancy, her intelligence, or something stands out. A movie most people probably have never seen, for instance, called Ziegfeld Girl. She's in it with Lana Turner and Hedy Lamarr, two great beauties, a brunette beauty and a blonde beauty. And Judy was not a great beauty. But yet you watch that movie today, and your eye turns to Judy Garland, the not great beauty, because there's just something that speaks right from the screen. And you don't get that from the other two, beautiful as they were. I also had some background in writing about Hollywood, so I knew the field. I wasn't coming in cold. I'd written about show business for Time magazine for several years, and I'd interviewed many movie stars and been on movie sets and been in the studios and so on. And also as a boy, I'd grown up in Los Angeles, and I'd gone to school with the children of scriptwriters and people like that. My parents were not in entertainment or show business or the movies, but you got a feel for it from having been there. So I started on Judy. I thought I thought it would take 3 years, something like that. The time just went on and on. I had to travel a great deal. I traveled all over the U.S. to do it, and I interviewed people everywhere. I went to where she had grown up as a kid until she was 4 in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. I went there a couple of times. Went to the place her parents had gotten married in Wisconsin. Lancaster, California, where she had spent several years in the Mojave Desert. Tennessee, where her father had been born and had grown up. And of course Hollywood and New York. And I also went to London and to Europe to talk to people there. I suppose this is a little silly, but one of her great comeback in 1951, she had been fired by MGM and was really rock bottom. Her great comeback was at the Palladium in London, and I wondered what really the Palladium was like, what it was like to stand on the stage of the Palladium, as she had done. The fear she must have had, this woman who knew that in 5 minutes her career would be over or it would be started up again. I mean, think of that. And so I went onto the stage of the Palladium, and you do, I'm not sure if it comes across in the book, but you get a feeling of this. The Palladium is a huge theater, but yet it's constructed in such a way that it feels very intimate, a kind of a horseshoe. And things like that give you a feeling for the subject that you don't get. You don't have to necessarily put it into words, but I think it comes across in a book if the author has done things like that.
Oh, I think it does come across in your book. I wanted to ask you, though, as you were writing, it's a very frank biography of Judy, because for all of her vibrancy and talent and charisma, she also had a very dark side. She had a struggle with depression, with addictions. How did her family feel? Did you involve her family at all? Was Liza Minnelli, for example, one of the people you interviewed?
Well, I certainly tried to. They wouldn't cooperate. The 2 daughters wouldn't cooperate, Liza and Lorna. Sid Luft, her third husband, I talked to. We had a long dinner together. I talked to. She was married 5 times. I talked to her last 2 husbands. Mickey Deans, her last husband, who found her body in London. He gave me. I spent several days with him. He was a great help. The rest of the family was dead. Her 2 sisters were dead, and of course her parents were dead. I would have liked to have talked to the daughters. I certainly, you always want to. I had actually interviewed Liza years earlier, not knowing that I was going to write a book about Judy. At the time of Cabaret, the movie in the early 70s, I had written a cover story for Time magazine. And at that time, she had talked extensively about her mother. And her mother had been dead 2 or 3 years. Right. And I think it was all very close to Liza at that point. And I think she was telling the truth. My own theory is that now, many years later, Liza has become a victim of the myth about her mother. Yeah. And I'm not sure she knows the truth unless she really did a psychoanalysis. I hear she tells stories about this and that. I watch her on TV, and they're not exactly inaccurate, but they don't really tell the truth. For instance, she will talk about, toward the end of Judy's life, Judy had no money. They were being evicted from hotels and that sort of thing. And Liza makes it out to be a kind of a lark. Oh, wasn't this fun that we were... Yeah. Well, it wasn't fun at all. It was hideous. Of course it was. And it was at the time, and I'm sure Liza really knows that deep down. And I'm not suggesting she's lying. I just don't think she knows anymore.
Well, and in a sense, the American public has done the same thing about Judy. That I know that there's some sort of saying, oh gosh, I don't want to know that about her, and we want to believe that she was always the little girl in the Wizard of Oz, and it's hard for us to move on. We just have a few minutes here, just a very brief time here, Gerald. And I wanted to ask you, here we have two brilliant people, Truman Capote and Judy Garland. Did their brilliance make them vulnerable?
I don't think it was their brilliance that made them vulnerable. I think it was their childhoods. They both had terrible childhoods and feelings of abandonment, of being exploited, of being misused, and I think that stuck with them for the rest of their lives. I think I'm certainly not the first to say this, but I think the childhood is the most important part, and I think it's essential for a biography to really delve into the childhood. I get annoyed with readers who say, well, I started the book a third of the way through because I didn't want to deal with the boring childhood stuff. Well, that is where it all comes from. And if it's a good biography, it all unwinds from the childhood.
Well, Gerald, you've done two terrific biographies here. I recommend them to anyone who loves to read. They're terrific. Congratulations. And I hear you're writing a novel. We'll be looking for it. Thanks for being here. And thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.
Writing Out Loud is underwritten by
Koch Industries. Koch is a proud employer of nearly 1,000 Oklahomans. Koch Industries, you know us better than you think.